When I was a senior in high school, I had to drop pre-calc. There were two big reasons for this. One was that I didn't want to be taking pre-calc, but I had taken algebra and I'd taken geometry and I'd taken trig, and pre-calc was next, and I'm kind of a completionist. So I had signed up for it and I had started taking it because it was the next thing to do. But it was interfering with other things that I wanted to do. I wasn't able to fit the classes that I wanted to take into my schedule because I had pre-calc sitting there. The second reason is that I had last known what was going on in a math class around 8th grade. I had been confident in 8th grade. I knew what was happening, and then it was freshman year and algebra, and I kind of knew what was happening, but a little bit less than I did before. And then it was geometry, and I had a fairly decent grasp on squares, triangles kind of, and I could get through it. And then it was trig, and I was pretty lost. But I muddled through with sines and cosines and tangents. And then it was pre-calc, and I had no clue what was happening. I was sitting in study groups in the library, not beginning to grasp things. I was taking tests that were largely guesses, showing work that was no work at all. And so I found that I was sitting in this class that I didn't want to take, where I had no idea what was going on, and I was barreling my way towards failing pre-calc. Maybe managing to eke out a D. So I needed to drop pre-calc. But I was scared to go to my parents and say, I need to drop pre-calc. You see, both of my parents were university professors. My dad in criminal justice, but his background was as a pharmacologist. He understood science and math. My mom as literally a math professor. And I was worried that if I went to them and said, I need to drop pre-calc, my mom was going to say, I could help you with pre-calc. And I would have to say, you're way too late to help me with pre-calc. But I steeled myself. I worked up my courage, and I went to my parents, and I said, I think I need to drop pre-calc. And they said, okay. See, it turns out that they didn't care at all whether I was taking pre-calc. They didn't see it as a life necessity for me, which was smart. It was perfectly fine for me to say, I don't want to be doing this. I don't understand what is going on. I would rather spend my time in music classes and humanities classes, creative writing classes, all of those things that I actually like to do and kind of understand. And then I went to my teacher, and I came up with the slip that lets you drop a class and said, I need to drop pre-calc. I'm sorry. And while I remember so little about this teacher, I don't even remember his name, and I should have looked it up. And I don't really remember what he looked like. I remember that he said, you know, I think that if you wanted to do this, you could, but you clearly don't want to. So yeah, go do something else. And he gave me a very generous gentleman's C. In our reading today, Paul, who last week was the new guy on the scene, is in Athens. And he is preaching at the Areopagus, or the Hill of Ares, or more colloquially, Mars Hill. It was this place that used to be the site of trials, and now it is kind of this place where people go and they talk. If the Agora in Athens is the marketplace of stuff, Mars Hill is the marketplace of ideas. People standing around making arguments. And Paul is evangelizing. He is telling people good news. And he does it in this moment in such a beautiful way. Such a beautiful way. Because he doesn't say to the Athenians, I think you're wrong about stuff. Instead, he starts with, I see how devout you are. You have so many gods and so many altars all around your city. I could recite them to you. You have altars to Zeus, you have altars to Ares, you have altars to Athena, of course. You have altars to Hermes and altars to Hades. And you even have this altar, maybe tucked back in some little alley in the city. You even have this altar to an unknown God. Like to someone you're not sure about, but you just want to cover your bases. What if I told you? What if I could tell you? What if I did tell you I know who your unknown God is? I know who the God is who you have built an altar to that you are unsure about. I can tell you who the God is who you have been fumbling toward. That God is none less than the creator and sustainer of all of the cosmos. That God is none less than the God to whom we are all children. Even your own poets say this. Paul is borrowing a little bit here. There is, in fact, a poem that says what he says. It says, we are all his offspring. The poem is very clear that that's about Zeus, but he is turning it, he is twisting it, he is changing it a little bit. He is saying, no, it's this unknown God, it's this God you're not sure of, it's this God you don't think you know about, whose children we all are. All of us. Whether you are from Athens, or Jerusalem, or even Rome, wherever you are from, whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, this is the God whose children we are. This is the God who sustains us. And better yet, this God came into the world. This God sent their word into the world like a parent sending a child, like a father sending a son. And even though we reacted poorly to that, even though we took that God, that word, that child, that son, and mocked him, and tortured him, and hung him on a cross until he died and laid him in a tomb, even though all of that happened, this God who loves us so much, this God responded by getting up again. By saying, I'm not done with you yet. By saying you are loved and worthy of love, and I'm going to keep loving you, and that's the God who is going to judge us. This God who is, dare I say it, love. What if I told you that that is your unknown God? The God towards whom you have been fumbling. We don't know what is possible until we try it. I did not know it was possible to drop a pre-calc until I tried to do it, and it turned out that it was very easy. We do not always know what it is like to worship a God who is love until we try it, and it turns out it is wonderful. And here is Paul suggesting to these Athenians, what if the God who you worshipped, the God with whom you spent time, the God on whom you spent energy, the God who you honored, the God who you served, what if that God was love? What if you picked up that altar to this God who you don't know, who you've been fumbling towards, who you've been stumbling towards, who you've been trying to get to? What if you took that altar and set it up in the middle of your city? What if you took that altar and set it up in the center of your heart? That altar to a God who is love. And that God who loves us so much that instead of reacting to our sins and our trespasses and our just general kind of messed upness with harsh judgments, rose from the dead to keep loving us. And there are some of them who scoff. Because, let's face it, it is ridiculous. It is crazy in a world that has for so long been under the thumb, under the boot of the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less, that has for so long been under the thumb, under the boot of empire. It is ridiculous to think that a sovereign, a ruler of all of the universe, a God, could be so loving, could be so forgiving, could be so supporting, could be so kind. That's not what rulers are like. That's not what emperors are like. That's not what the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less are like. This is ridiculous. What God would respond to the death of their child with love for the murderers? But there are a few. There are a few who say, that's weird, I want to hear more. Do you maybe have a collection of letters you could send us? And there are a few who say, I want that. I didn't know it was possible. I didn't know it was an option, but I want that. More than that, I need that. More than that, I can find life at last in that. That thing that I didn't think was possible. That I didn't think was possible so much that I never even imagined it. It never occurred to me that that could be the center of faith. I don't want to talk down about Athenians. I don't want to talk down about Greeks in general. I don't want to talk down about people in general. They had their religion. They had their loves. They knew inside of them, at least some of the time, that the foundation of the world is love. They wrote poems about it. They maybe had the direction a little bit off. But there is something inside of us that tells each and every one of us that love is at the center of all of this. That love, in fact, is the way. It is the path we should follow. It is the foundation of the life we should live. It is, in fact, all of the life that we should live. We should be abiding in love. Wouldn't it be nice to abide in love? And then we run into the little voices that say, but you can't. There are traditions. There are altars to other things. There's other stuff you have to do. How would it work? It would add to the debt, it would add to the stress, it would add to whatever. I mean, you've got to go along to get along, and we have to fit in somehow. Just loving isn't going to work. But you don't know what's possible until you try. And I dare to say, loving beyond measure, loving more than we think we can love, just might be the only thing that works. Because it is, in fact, the path toward abiding in God, the foundation of the universe, the creator and sustainer of all that is, the very source of our life, the very source of our being. It is a radical and crazy idea. And I own that entirely, but it is an idea worth trying. It is a life worth trying. This week I saw a video on YouTube. I was debating a little whether to share this bit, but I think it's important. It was by this guy named Jared, who is an atheist. He grew up in a very conservative Pentecostal world, and he loved it. He was part of it. He gave his all to it. But there was a lot of control and a lot of concern and a lot of worry, and so he left. But the thing that he does, the reason that he has a YouTube channel, is he goes to church. He goes to churches, and then he makes little videos about his experiences at these churches. And he went to one in downtown Raleigh, a big Episcopal cathedral. And it happened to be their senior Sunday. And these kids, just a couple of them, not all of the seniors that they had, just a couple of them got up and talked about their faith journey, talked about their life in this church. And what they talked about was love. What they talked about was support. What they talked about was a community that was there for them, that didn't judge them or cast them aside, and that even now, as this community knew that they were leaving and unlikely to come back, was celebrating them, was lifting them up. And what Jared said, which touched me deeply, was that he was jealous. He had never had that. That was not his experience of church. That was not his experience of God growing up. And he wished he could have that. That thing that we so casually talk about, that God who is love. And as we were watching, Mariah and I, Mariah said, "Not entirely sure this guy's an atheist. I think he's trying. I think he's got trauma. I think he's a little messed up from everything, but he is maybe fumbling towards an unknown God, and maybe occasionally getting little glimpses around the corner in a hymn, in some seniors talking about their faith journey. And maybe, just maybe, he'll find his way back to that God. Or maybe, just maybe, that God will remain an unknown God who he will still find some solace and a home in. And the reason that I am telling you this, the reason that I am saying this, the reason this is important is that there are so many people who are in churches who are not experiencing, who are not being told about, who are not being taught about, who are not being introduced to a God who is love. And they don't expect to be. And there are so many people outside of churches who will not set foot in one because they do not expect to find a church where God is love, where support is unconditional, where you can just be and abide. But you don't know what's possible until you try. And you certainly don't know that you can try it until you're told about it. You certainly don't know you can walk in until you hear that you can walk in. You certainly don't know that you can find a seat until you're invited. And here is Paul. Here is Paul inviting these Athenians to try something they did not know was possible. And some laugh, some scoff, because of course it's impossible. But others say, I want that, how do I get in? And he guides them in, and they become part of something they did not know they could be a part of. Because it turns out that you really can drop calc. And it turns out that you really can drop the illusion of the world that tells you that it's all got to be rules and hardship and difficulty. And it turns out that you can abide in love. And it turns out that you can invite others to find love. And if we do that, then more people might find the very thing that they have been looking for, that they have been fumbling for, that they have been stumbling towards. And as more people find that love, as that light of love grows brighter, as that rain of love is nurtured all around us, then the whole world is transformed. And at long last, we will all finally abide in love. So go find a Mars Hill. Go find a conversation. Go find a marketplace of ideas. And maybe, just maybe, say, I know a place where we do everything we can to love, to abide in love, to introduce people to love, in the hopes that we will all one day know that we too are children, beloved, precious children of the God who is love.